got children standing here, arms outstretched into the sky, tears drying on their face. He has been here. Brothers lie in shallow graves, fathers lost without a trace, a nation blind to their disgrace since he's been here. And I see no bravery, no bravery in your eyes anymore, only sadness. And I see no bravery, no bravery in your eyes anymore, only sadness, only sadness.
And welcome back to Coast. I'm George Norrie. Don Brown's going to be with us for a couple of hours tonight. Let me tell you a little bit about him. He's a former U.S. Navy JAG officer. That's a lawyer who has served in the Pentagon, where he provided legal advice to the Secretary of the Navy and the Judge Advocate General of the Navy. He now writes legal and military thrillers about the Navy. In so doing, he has developed a track record for future events in his novels as well. Don, I want to bring you in and thank you for serving, by the way.
George, good evening to you, and happy Independence Day weekend to you and the millions of your wonderful listeners. Thanks for having me.
You know, I spent 9 years in the Navy. One more year, I would have been a lieutenant commander. It started conflicting with my professional life, and I had to do my little 9 years and out, but I had a great time doing it, Don.
Well, thank you for your service, too, and it's good to speak to another Navy man tonight, George.
Absolutely. I did a little work at the Pentagon as well. I was there in 1983 or 4. Would you have been there at that time?
No, we were there a few years apart, but once you've been to the building, you've been to ground zero, you've seen the whole drill, and it's quite an experience. It certainly is.
Yeah, it is. Now, tell me a little bit more about yourself, Don.
I served 5 years active, another 11 in the reserves. Now I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina, and started to write really military thrillers in 2005. My first work of fiction was released with Vagabond, now HarperCollins Christian fiction, entitled Treason. It examined the issue at the time of radical Islamic infiltration in the U.S. military, and continued to write a series of books following that, and there have been 11 books published altogether, 10 primarily fiction with HarperCollins and Mountain View Press, and now Cloud Science Sources 17, which you had mentioned, which was just released at the end of May, about a month ago.
Well, it's a great job. This is a movie, by the way, so keep your fingers crossed on this one, Don.
Well, unfortunately, Call Sign Sources 17 is not a work of fiction, but yes, it would be certainly very riveting on the big screen and probably need to be done.
It sure does. Tell me a little bit about SEAL Team 6.
SEAL Team 6 is a colloquial name used for the United States Navy Developmental Warfare Group, which is in Little Creek, Virginia. It is one of several SEAL teams, but SEAL Team 6 is considered to be the elite of the elite. There are several squadrons that operate within SEAL Team 6, and they are certainly, we've heard all about them. We've seen the recent movie with Chris Kyle, but the SEAL teams operate in unconventional warfare, and they're the very finest of our special operations units. Of course, we have a number of excellent special operations units in the U.S. military, SEAL Team 6, Delta Force, U.S. Army Rangers, but they are considered the creme de la creme, and are typically called upon when the United States needs to perform, military feats that call for extraordinary achievement. We saw an example of that May 1st of this year, of 2011, when President Obama ordered SEAL Team 6 into Pakistan on a mission called Operation Neptune Spear to take out Osama Bin Laden, which is one of the most recent of its most remarkable achievements.
And they're all men. I don't think we have any women as SEALs, or do we?
We do not have any that I'm aware of at this point. Of course, at some point, I'm sure that there is a push towards that. There was a very well-known movie a number of years ago, G.I. Jane, I think. But at this point, the SEAL team itself is all men. I think that's correct.
Now let's talk about, of course, some of the tragedies that have been incurred because of this. And of course, you key in on Afghanistan. Tell us this story. What was the mission?
Extortion 17 is a call sign for a United States Army National Guard helicopter, a Chinook CH-47D, which is essentially a troop chopper. The Chinooks have been around for a long time, since the Vietnam era. If you've ever seen one flying, they're large choppers, and you can put about 30 personnel on board, a little over that. And there is a forward propeller and a backwards and aft propeller. The propellers, if you looked at them from above, do resemble, they're three blades. They almost look like a peace sign, each one of the propellers. This particular mission originated in northeastern Afghanistan in Logar province, which is about 50 to 60 miles south of the capital of Kabul and bordering the Pakistani border. August 6, 2011 was 66 years to the date, interestingly, of the anniversary of our dropping of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima, and approximately 97 days after U.S. Navy SEALs had gone into Pakistan and taken out Osama Bin Laden. So in the northeastern sector of Afghanistan, there have been firefights going on, off and on, where we were doing a lot of the same actions that we've been taking in Vietnam. We go in and take an area and then leave it, have to go and re-secure it because the local Afghan forces weren't able to hold it. Such is the case in this Tangi Valley. There had been a firefight going on in this Tangi River Valley in northeastern Afghanistan for several hours. And United States forces were ostensibly looking for a Taliban operative named Farid Tahir. And approximately 3 hours before this last fateful flight of Extortion 17, in which we lost, which was the deadliest loss of life, the greatest loss of life of American life in the Afghan war. We lost 30 Americans, primarily U.S. Navy SEALs, but not just Navy SEALs. There were also five members of the Army National Guard flight crew and 3 U.S. Air Force Special Operations operators. Prior to that, there had been another mission flown by this helicopter and by a sister helicopter, codenamed Extortion 16, in which both of those helicopters lifted off from this forward operating base and took a group of U.S. Army Rangers to an area not far from where this fateful shoot-down would take place, but not over the same type of hot zone. So 3 hours earlier, the helicopter had flown one mission. Then at 2:22 a.m. local time, we're going to give you local time so it's easier to kind of keep a grasp of, on August the 6th, the chopper takes off, and there are 30 Americans on board and 8 Afghans. Most of those Americans are U.S. Navy SEALs, 17 from SEAL Team 6. There are 5 additional U.S. Navy support personnel supporting the SEAL team. In addition to that, there are 3 United States Air Force special operators. These are pararescue operators. And then there is the 5-member United States Army National Guard flight crew, including 2 pilots and 3 support personnel on the back. In addition to that, there are 8 Afghans on board the chopper. And George, this was supposed to be a 10-minute flight from wheels up to wheels down.
Right.
So the chopper takes off, heads, in sort of in a north westerly direction, and flying over parallel to a mountain ridge. And then, if you can imagine a fish hook, the flight pattern from the sky resembled a fish hook, with the operating base being at the eye of the hook where you would string the hook. It comes in a parallel pattern to this ridge, and then begins to turn back here like a fishing hook would. And then at the spear of the hook, it comes over this hotly contested valley, this Tangi Valley. Now, to set the stage, on May the 11th, just about, not quite 90 days earlier, U.S. military intelligence had intercepted message traffic from the Taliban that the Taliban was moving 100 additional fighters into this Tangi Valley with RPGs, solely for the purpose of shooting down a United States helicopter with special operators on board.
And these are RPGs, for people who don't know. These are these shoulder harness type missiles, right?
Yes, and the acronym is rocket propelled grenade, correct. They don't have a lot of range, George. So if you're going to take out a chopper with an RPG, it is by necessity going to be a close range shot. Okay. And they're not extremely accurate. Matter of fact, this particular RPG, the RPG-7, according to the military's own report, and I've examined over 1,200 pages of the military report, which had been classified and then strangely declassified, and that's another story in and of itself. The RPG has a maximum range of 170 meters, and that's it. But at any rate, this chopper turns in over this valley, and we have intercepted on May the 11th message traffic that they're bringing in 100 extra fighters with RPGs solely for the purpose of shooting down a chopper. The 90-day period between the Bin Laden attack, in which we took out Osama Bin Laden May the 1st, and then the last mission of Extortion 17, both involving members of SEAL Team 6, but not with an overlap, and I'll explain that just in a second. In other words, we don't believe there are any operators on board the Extortion 17 that went on the Bin Laden raid. They're part of the same team. There were 3 separate attacks against United States military helicopters over this small valley. And so we knew that it was a hot zone. It was an extreme hot zone. Now, part of the problem here, and I've outlined this in the book, but the first problem that we need to focus on is rules of engagement. The rules of engagement under which this helicopter was expected to operate were absolutely suicidal. We're in a situation where when the chopper takes off, George, of course, I said a moment ago, it is taking off. It has its sister chopper with Extortion 16. Now, the first thing to remember about that, when both of these choppers flew a mission 3 hours earlier, both of them had Rangers on board. In other words, the Ranger team was split half between Extortion 16 and half between Extortion 17. But in contrast, on this particular mission, for reasons unbeknownst to anyone, all the SEALs were jammed into Extortion 17, and Extortion 16, the sister chopper, which was in the air and available to transport troops, was empty, except for the flight crew. That's one of the many mysteries that surround this.
Stay with us now. We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back and talk more about your work. Call sign Extortion 17. A riveting story, a sad story. 38 soldiers died in that episode. We'll be back in a moment on Coast to Coast Stadium. And welcome back to Coast. Don Brown is with us. We're talking about his latest work, Call Sign Extortion 17. We are talking about the helicopter that was shot down in Afghanistan. 38 soldiers died. Some of them, of course, were Afghans. 8. I think there were 8 Afghans on that helicopter.
There were 7, yes, and again, we'll get that in a moment. 7 unidentified Afghans. We don't know who they were because of security breach. 7 who were Afghan commandos, we think. We don't know who they were. And then the 8th was an interpreter, an Afghan interpreter. The other 30 were Americans.
Okay, so there were 2 helicopters. One was empty.
Right.
The other one, of course, Extortion 17, was loaded with everyone. And now, Taliban, they were spotted in that area. We weren't given permission to fire on them. How come?
That's a good question. Matter of fact, there were a total of 5 aircraft in the air, George, converging on this landing zone looking for this one guy. The 2 Extortion 16 and 17, 16 breaks off. But George, Extortion 17 goes in over this valley, accompanied first off by 2 Apache helicopters. You know anything about an Apache helicopter? I know you do. It is a powerful baby. You know, they got Hellfire missiles, 70 rocket pods, machine guns, and then flying over that, there was an AC-130 gunship. And this is what you're referring to. The gunship was flying counterclockwise. The Apaches, the 2 Apaches in the gunship, had their eyes set on the landing zone that Extortion 17 is headed towards. This AC-130 gunship is seeing everything that's happening on the ground. And it sees Taliban, they call them squirters, that's the military acronym that's used in the aircraft control transcript, moving towards the landing zone. The AC-130 gunship repeatedly requests permission to take out these Taliban moving toward the landing zone by foot, and inexplicably is denied permission to take these hostile forces out.
Unbelievable.
And it's unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable.
They literally can see these Taliban, probably armed with their shoulder harness missiles and their rifles, running toward the landing spot where the helicopters are about ready to land. and we do nothing about it.
Yes, and part of the issue, of course, we know that this open season, the summer of 2011 was open season on U.S. choppers in Afghanistan. We already have had 3 choppers attacked, none shot down yet in this valley within the last 90 days before this chopper moves in. And we have on-the-record information and off-the-record information. The on-the-record information, the aircraft commander is testifying as part of the follow-up investigation, and he gratuitously adds to put on the record that we requested permission to fire on these squirters he called in and were denied. The navigator on the AC-130 also testified. Same thing. We were told we could not fire on them, only to try to monitor their position. And we know that as Extortion 17 was almost 8 minutes overdue, still hanging in the air, inexplicable delays hanging in the air, it was taken out at close range by an RPG. And you know, George, as a fellow naval officer and as a historian, that it's been a basic tenet of United States military doctrine, even going back to Gettysburg. You know, if you've ever been there, both sides are firing cannonade across the field, or at Iwo Jima, or at Normandy. We soften the beachhead before we put our troops in. That is a basic tenet of American military doctrine. In this case, the landing zone was not blasted. The very dangerous and hot valley was not cleared out, and as a result, these guys got shot down, and there's no viable explanation for it at all.
And was there ever any retaliation done after the shoot down?
After the shoot down, it's interesting, because as soon as the Apache helicopters, those 2 Apaches, by the way, who could have blasted the landing zone also, were not given permission. As soon as the shoot down occurred, one of the Apaches instinctively began firing into the landing zone. And the commander of that chopper was later raked over the coals as part of the investigation for firing into that landing zone and in the area around the landing zone without permission. So that happened. And then, in addition to that, at 4:15 a.m., after this chopper went down at approximately 2:40 a.m., 2:39 a.m., 12 seconds shy of 2:40 local time. We brought in, and there are contradictory reports as to what group arrived on the ground first. The official military report states that U.S. Army Rangers arrived first at 4:12 a.m. I don't have any reason to doubt that. I think there were groups, there were clearly units on the ground before that. That's kept out of the military report. That's another story. U.S. Army Pathfinders arrived minutes later at 4:15 a.m. by helicopter. The Pathfinders were flown in on a Black Hawk, and that Black Hawk got pre-suppression fire into their landing zone, as well they should have. But the rules of engagement changed within a matter of less than 2 hours, whereas the Black Hawk crew team got pre-suppression fire and the SEALs did not. So it's totally inexplicable. We had choppers fired at in that over that valley. One was hit, and MH-47 was hit just about 3 weeks earlier and made it back to base. We had another identical chopper on June the 6th, another CH-47D. They fired 14 RPGs and small arms fire at that, but fortunately that chopper was at an altitude that there was a miss. On June the 4th, there was an attack against the Black Hawk in which the RPG exploded within 1 rotor's length of that chopper and almost brought it down. And despite all that, we still are not getting pre-suppression fire to the SEAL team moving in, and it's absolutely inexcusable.
Don, wasn't this the single largest loss of life for U.S. Navy SEALs?
That is correct. The largest loss of life in the Afghan war for American forces, the single largest loss of life in the history of U.S. Navy SEALs. And unfortunately, George, and I'm so grateful that you are helping to bring attention to it tonight, but most Americans don't have a clue about it. Yeah. And, part of the reason I think it's been buried amongst other, flare-ups and national events that have occurred, and it's a real shame, but there needs to be a national discussion on the rules of engagement. And this case, this issue, this shoot down of this helicopter with this loss of life of these Navy SEALs needs to be at the very center of it, because you cannot send your forces in to a hostile zone, especially a hostile zone like Afghanistan, with one hand tied behind their back. You're going to get killed. And this particular helicopter, this CH-47D, being a troop chopper, is not an offensive chopper. It has a 240 caliber machine gun, which is, very defensive in nature, but it can't stand the snowbird's chance against rockets fired against it, against RPGs fired against it. And if you don't clear those landing zones out, anybody can take a point-blank shot and bring it down.
Yeah.
And there needs to be a national discussion on that issue.
There's something very sad about out of sight, out of mind, Don, with the American public, that if an issue isn't constantly bombarding them and it goes away, if the media basically forgets it, it's done. It's gone.
That's correct. And in this case, there was very little attention paid to it to begin with. I mean, certainly there was some national coverage, but part of the issue here is that there was an investigation ordered the day following the shoot down on August the 7th by General James Mattis, who at that time was CENTCOM, the four-star Marine Corps. He was a Marine Corps general, four-star, general officer overseeing CENTCOM there at MacDill Air Base. He ordered a one-star brigadier general, Army Brigadier Jeffrey Colt, to go to Afghanistan and to initiate an investigation. George, this investigation lasted 5 weeks, from August the 7th, the day after the shoot down, until September the 13th of 2011. At the conclusion of the investigation, there was an executive summary indicating no one was at fault. It was just one of those things that happened in the fog of war. So there is an investigation which basically did not address the rules of engagement, nor did it even address the fact that the AC-130 had seen Taliban moves. All that was left out of the official report. And the thing, as I said a moment ago, is one of the strange turn of events in this case is that 1 month after the investigation was closed, bear in mind it was closed in September 13th of 2011, in October 2011, the military had brought in family members of the guys that lost their lives on board this chopper for a briefing at Little Creek, Virginia, which, as you know, is where SEAL Team 6, or the Death Group, is headquartered. And during the course of that briefing, somehow, some way, someone had taken 1,250 pages of information concerning his testimony, exhibits examined, forensic stuff, all this evidence, which 1 month earlier had been classified as top secret, somehow was declassified and given to some of these family members on a flash drive. Now, that's a mystery. I suspect senior enlisted and mid-level officers, to be honest with you. But somebody wanted this information out. And so one of the reasons, I think, is that you haven't had, much more attention on it is because there was a delay, and I'm grateful the family members got this disc, but there was a delay in getting it to them, and everything sort of died down, other things were happening. But some of the family members began to look at the disc and discovered some serious irregularities, and one thing led to another, and now we know that there's no reason these guys should have died, George, none whatsoever.
We're with Don Brown, of course. His book is called Call Sign Extortion 17. What about the bodies? Were we ever able to extract them and get them out of there?
The status of the bodies is, again, one of the many unanswered questions. Now, on August the 9th, 2011, the 30 bodies of the Americans, along with 8 Afghans, were flown to Dover Air Base. I raised the question, why are you bringing Afghans back to the United States? But all 38 were flown to Dover Air Base. On that day, August the 9th, the Pentagon, through its spokesman at the time, Marine Lieutenant Colonel David Laban, announced that due to the nature of the shoot-down, and here were his words, there are no identifiable remains. So the Pentagon makes the claim initially that there are no identifiable remains. In addition, some of the family members are told that their sons are being cremated, which caused a bit of a brouhaha in and of itself. So we have on August the 9th the claim there are no identifiable remains, and some family members being said that their sons are going to be cremated. Now then, remember that in October, this flash drive was given to family members 2 months after the Pentagon makes the claim no identifiable remains. I've read all the evidence, and there was testimony taken from U.S. Army pathfinders on the scene. The pathfinders, the pathfinders were on the scene, and testimony given by the J3 officer indicates that at least 8 of the men were found outside the chopper. They were not even hardly burned, and they were clearly identifiable. So we have an irreconcilable conflict between what the Pentagon told us all this tonight and what we know to be true from what the Pathfinders found on the scene. We have at least 8 bodies that were clearly identifiable. We don't know if the bodies were cremated or not. You know, I've got some evidence that some possibly were not, but we don't know. In July of 2013, Congressman Jacob Chapin of Utah, who would later conduct, a nominal hearing in February of 2014, made the comment that Bob Cusack, who was a writer for the publication The Hill in Washington, D.C., he made this comment. He said, the body I saw did not need to be cremated. That comment was made in July 2013 by the congressman whose committee was investigating this, implying that bodies had been cremated. Now, he didn't actually come out and say it, but the military has never said what happened to the bodies. Part of the issue with cremation, George, is that if you cremate, you destroy DNA evidence. If you don't have DNA evidence, you don't know who's who. And one of the big questions here, why do we have 7 unidentified Afghans on board that chopper? So it remains a big mystery today. There was a hearing, as I mentioned a moment ago, February the 27th, 2014, conducted by Congressman Jacob Chapin's subcommittee on national security, part of the House Oversight Committee. At that hearing, which lasted a little bit over an hour and a half, the military presented 5 witnesses. And when you see these congressional hearings, they all swear to tell the truth. They all sit on the other side of the table. They get asked questions by congressmen. Those 5 witnesses, George, 2 were civilians. One was the administration appointee working the Pentagon named Gary Reed, a deputy secretary of defense, and for low-intensity conflict. He's got a lot of stuff in his title. You know how that is. The second civilian testifying, George, was a lady who was in charge of Pentagon mortuary affairs, funeral expert. And then the only 3 military personnel were officers. The officers in charge of the Navy, Army, and Air Force Mortuary Affairs Division. So at the hearing, we have 5 witnesses, 1 who's a political appointee, and 4 who are funeral experts. There is not a single witness from Afghanistan who saw anything, not a single witness concerning rules of engagement, no discussion on that. And George, there's not a single question from a single member of the Congress in that committee as to what happened to the bodies after there had been an issue on the status of the bodies. That's an issue that needs to be addressed, and it hasn't been, and we don't know what happened.
What is happening to date now, Don, with this entire situation? Is it all been swept under the old carpet, or is it alive?
I mean, at this point, it appears to have been swept under the carpet. Of course, my book is out. It's raised some additional questions. What I'm hoping is, really, in my opinion, the Armed Services Committee of the Standing Armed Services Committee of the House or the Senate should reopen the investigation and have some very open and frank public discussions on the rules of engagement. There needs to be some answers given as to why we aren't giving pre-suppression fire, into that landing zone. There needs to be some answers as to why the rules of engagement were set so that AC-130 could not
It's
take
2 o'clock.
And moving toward the landing zone. I looked at the internal report, and there was a claim made by Mr. Reed, for example, at the hearing, that the RPG that took this chopper out was fired from a Qualent hut some 220 meters away. All right. First off, when you look, there is a Joint Combat Assessment Team which worked under the jurisdiction of General Colt to reassemble everything, to interview everybody. They were the principal on-ground investigators, and this Joint Combat Assessment Team and the military evidence said that no one could identify the point of origin of the RPG, that no one saw it. Yet Mr. Reed said in his hearing that it was fired from a Qualent hut 220 meters away. But George, remember a second ago when I was talking about this RPG-7, it only has a maximum effective range of 170 meters.
Yeah, it would have died out before it even got to it.
Sure, but see, if you claim that it was fired from a Qualent hut 220 meters away, then you're essentially saying it was fired outside of the landing zone, and you're essentially saying it was done no good to clear the landing zone.
Right.
But we know, basically, because this chopper was between 100 and 150 feet off the deck, and that's what the military, that's what the JCAT investigation, Joint Combat Assessment Team, concludes 100 to 150 feet off the deck when it was shot down. We know the angle of strike, and when you know the altitude and the angle of strike, all you got to do is apply a little basic mathematics, and you can determine the approximate distance that the RPG was from the chopper. It was at point blank range, obviously in the landing zone. Obviously, in that valley, should have been cleared out.
What would you say, Don, has been the most disturbing portion of this story that you were able to uncover?
Well, my book does a couple of things. One, one thing that needs to happen is there needs to be a historical account put together of this incident, because there is there's historical importance to it being the largest loss of life. And one thing that's absolutely uncontroverted is the refusal by the chain of command to allow the AC-130 to take out these Taliban operatives. Absolutely disturbing and infuriating. So the center, the centerpiece of the complaint against the military are the rules of engagement that were set. The reversal of the rules that do not allow us to soften the beachhead, that is inexcusable. Now, the second thing the book does is it asks a lot of questions that should have been asked by the military investigative team that were not asked, and by the United States Congress that weren't asked. Like, what happened to the black box? Like, what happened to the status of the bodies? Like, we found bullets in some of the bodies, and those bullets were thrown away. No questions were asked. So the book asked a number of questions that still need to be asked, but the one inexcusable, incontrovertible thing to take away is that our military is being forced, and the very finest special operators we have from SEAL Team 6 are being forced to fly into a hot zone where a battle had been taking place for 3 hours without, and we had tons of firepower from that AC-130
without cleaning it out. That's the thing. Don, hold on. We're at the break. We're going to come back with more, and we'll take some phone calls too from those of you that just really, really are concerned about this whole thing. Welcome back. Don Brown is with us. Don, we're talking about really what was for you the most gut-wrenching part of what you were uncovering. And let's get back into that again. We'll go, and then we'll take some phone calls here with really concerned listeners about this story. It's a sad, sad story. I mean, it was unnecessary, wasn't it?
It was, and I have been in communication with members of the U.S. military who were in that region, in that very valley, on other flights, and who were just very, very frustrated. I had some communication with a gentleman who was on another CH-47 that was shot at a year later over the same valley. Still no change in the rules of engagement. And people ask why. I think the rules of engagement were set in a politically correct manner. President Hamid Karzai had been complaining about American Special Operations Forces from 2009 on, as we announced that we were going to pull out. Karzai, who at that time was the president, who we installed in 2001, who was the president of Afghanistan, had begun negotiating with the Taliban. He realized that he had to bring the Taliban into a coalition government if he was going to survive afterwards. And so I believe the rules of engagement were set in part to appease complaints that he was making against Special Operations Forces. Additionally, I have been told by members of the military that the Afghans would falsely claim that our air power was falsely claimed in many cases killing civilians, which wasn't true. But at any rate, can you imagine the foolishness, George, if you go back to D-Day, if General Eisenhower said, okay, we're not going to shell the French coastline because we want to win the hearts and minds of the French people. That was the excuse that the military gave to family members for not having pre-suppression fire. We want to win the hearts and minds of the Afghani people. Can you imagine how foolish that would have been? We're not going to shell the beaches. We're just going to put our men right into the teeth of the enemy fire without doing everything we can to make the ground as safe for them. It's just absolutely mind-boggling.
Where do we stand with troops now, realistically, in Afghanistan and in Iraq right now, Don?
That's the $50,000 question, I suppose. President Obama said we were going to be out of Afghanistan. We're not out of Afghanistan. And Iraq, because you're following events there. they're now step up and sending some advisors back. We've got the whole situation with ISIS going on the ground, and of course the limited number of advisors sitting back in that are being sent back in are not going to, in my opinion, have any meaningful effect in deterring the growth of that caliphate. So it's difficult to really get a good feel, in my opinion, on where both of these operations are headed. It is very, very difficult, though, to maintain an occupation force for a long period of time in any country. And we had been in Afghanistan, 10 years, and the rules began to change to make it less and less favorable for our guys to survive. If you're not going to put troops on the ground and give them every chance to survive, American troops, you don't need to have them there. But time will tell as what's going to happen, and who knows what's going to blow up next. And we're seeing a lot of reaction, I think, in terms of our policy in that part of the world, and rather than proactive planning at this point.
Well, and regardless of the merits of why we are there, and let's not argue those right now, but the fact is that we are, and it seems to be, Don, that no matter what country we have gone in, whether it was Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, when we pull out, it falls apart, doesn't it?
That seems to be a consistent theme, especially, George, when there has been a prolonged, sort of occupying presence. In Vietnam, we were there for a number of years, from the time President Kennedy put advisors in the early 60s until, we finally evacuated the embassy in Saigon in the mid-70s. That was a long time. And you become an occupation force. And unfortunately, sometimes the rules change. We do great at going in and conquering, but the rules of engagement that were in place both here and in Vietnam, I've heard old-timers from Vietnam, I shouldn't call them old-timers, but I've heard Vietnam vets tell me that we have come full circle in terms of our determination to protect troops. Because, in Vietnam, we would take a hill and then abandon it, and take it in. It's the same foolish cycle. And a lot of that was going on also in Afghanistan, whereby we would pull our forces out of, in fact, this valley is one example of that, and the Afghan military would then be unable to hold it against the Taliban, and you go back in and retake it again. This is a very costly type of planning, and we need to rethink that.
Let's go to William in Battle Creek, Michigan now on the wild card line. William, thanks for calling. Go ahead.
Hey, good evening, guys. Thank you both for your service. My question is, and please take this with respect that I'm doing. Of the four women that were in charge, Jared, Rice, Clinton, and Howard, which one of them would have had oversight and would have gave the order to put all those brave boys on that one low and slow helicopter? And I'll take my answer off the air. Thank you, sir.
And would any of them have been able to do that, Don?
The caller asked a valid question. Why did you cram 30 Americans on one chopper? Why did you put 17 SEAL members? I was giving a talk in Bath, North Carolina, just a few nights ago, and shout out to those fine folks down in Bath, North Carolina, if you're listening tonight, to the library down there. And after I gave the talk, I was approached by a former U.S. Navy SEAL member, a member of SEAL Team 2, who made the very same comment, the very same observation and concern that the caller just made. He told me, he said, look, they're going after one guy with, we're chasing one guy, Tahir, with 17 SEALs. I mean, why do you pack everybody in one? But the former SEAL was telling me, in my day, we don't need more than seven men chasing one guy. This force was deemed an immediate reactionary force. So the Ranger team that went earlier was an assault force. An immediate reactionary force is an emergency force, George. So, it's called on in the emergency. So if the Rangers have been pinned down, the SEALs have been called in to help them out of it. But to use an immediate reactionary force to look for one guy, it defies the purpose of the immediate reactionary force. In other words, these SEALs were on emergency status. There was no real emergency. This one guy, Tahir, was eventually killed by a missile fired by an F-16. And one of the questions has been asked, why did you just take him out with the drone to begin with?
Yeah.
So the caller asked me the question, Valerie, I don't know. We don't know who in the chain of command. We really don't know the chain of command decided to order the SEALs crammed onto one chopper rather than two. We don't know, and that's one of the reasons I think it's important for the Armed Services Committee to look into this to find out who and why that happened. But the caller asked an excellent question.
I know some CEOs who will not permit their staff when they fly. They have to go to conventions and things like that. Will not let them all fly in the same plane.
That's true. And remember, there were two choppers headed to this landing zone. One was empty. Extortion 16 was empty. And, you know, somebody said, well, maybe Extortion 16 was a decoy. Well, it broke off. That second chopper broke off and then flew in a holding pattern over a ridge at least 4 miles away when Extortion 17 went in, when it did this vicious turn and came over this valley. So it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever to have two choppers in the air. You could have split the SEAL team in half, and at least maybe half the guys would survive. So, it's a legitimate question. It's a big question, and it's a question that we don't really have an answer to, and we need an answer to that.
Next up, we go to Ian in San Luis Obispo in California. Ian, thanks for calling. You're on the air with us. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, it was a great show tonight, George.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the black box. They claimed that they couldn't find the black box afterwards, and they said it was swept away in a river because it crashed near the Tangi River there. The thing about that, though, it was in August, so that's summertime, and you know, the rivers would be very low in that part of the area by then. And the other thing is, even if it was a roaring, you know, torrent of a river, for something like this to happen, where you have the biggest single loss of life for the SEALs in their history, biggest single loss of life in the war. I mean, you do everything you could to find it, and they seemed like they didn't even try. It's kind of like the cremation things where they just say, oh, you know, we cremated them. So I looked into this a lot, and now this is going to get, you know, conspiratorial, and I don't know if Don will agree with this, but I believe that the 8 Afghans that were swapped out at the last minute on Extortion 17, they had 8 other guys. At the last minute, they swapped them out for 8 other guys. Like you said, 7 Afghani soldiers and an interpreter. And I think that in their gear, there was explosives, and it was meant, and that's why they packed all the SEALs in, and it was meant to explode. And the reason for that is, I believe that the members of SEAL Team 6 in Extortion 17 were the same ones that did the Bin Laden raid in Abbottabad. And the reason they wanted to get rid of them is because Bin Laden was not what they calmed down. Bin Laden's been dead forever. I mean, you know, he's been dead back since 2001. But they wanted to keep, I mean, if you want to end the Bin Laden thing, you have to make a big event. And Bin Laden's been the reason that we spent billions of dollars, lives lost. If it was just a suppressive fire at the landing zone that was the oddity, and that is a huge oddity, you're right, that would be strange, but there's so many other things. No black box, all the SEALs crammed on one, and there's Extortion 16 there, the cremation of the bodies, there's no DNA, so you can't link them to the Abbottabad compound, the 8 Afghani swap. There's so much stuff. It's just, it screams out, in my opinion, to connect with the Abbottabad raid. And I just want to know what you think of that.
Don, that's a fascinating possibility. What do you think?
Well, Ian, again, asked excellent questions, and I've been to San Luis Obispo. It's a beautiful town, by the way. But at any rate, on the issue of the black box, this is one of the principal mysteries. We know from having the military investigation now, there's sworn testimony from U.S. Army pathfinders. Remember, Georgia said they arrived at 4:15 a.m., and those pathfinders, about 20 pathfinders, a great unit of pathfinders, the first group on the ground Normandy, they usually go in and they go in ahead of flights and try to mark landing areas. They go in afterwards and they try to clean things up. So the pathfinders come onto the ground, and George, these pathfinders are ordered to go find the black box. And they spend nearly 2 days looking for the black box. And cannot find it. And the sworn testimony of the pathfinders, the pathfinder commander who testifies under oath, and I've got the exhibit in the report. Actually, this is an exhibit attached report. states that this is the first time we were never able to find a black box in any of these choppers that have gone down. George, we know that at the time of the shoot down, there were 26 or so United States choppers we lost in Afghanistan over 10 years. Half those were CH-47Ds, just like this one. And the Pathfinder says, the first time they were going to find a black box. Now, so there's the questions of what happened to it. So the families are told in October, talking to the theory that Ian just mentioned, that it was washed away by a flood. Well, first off, it's true that there was some flooding, apparently, that there was a flash flood in the valley. The chopper went down near a creek, and if you look at photographs of the area, it's sort of very, very muddy. And that night there were some flash floods, but the ludicrous notion that you're going to lose a black box in a flood when they have low emission, they're pinging low emission signals anyway. Well, we pull black boxes out of 3,000 feet of water, so that's just crazy to begin with. Well, George, it was washed away by a flood, then, or theory or story, lasted for a period of another almost 3 years until. Now, from October 2011, we hear it's washed away by a flood until February of 2014, going back to this congressional hearing when this Mr. Reed, this Deputy Secretary of Defense, testified to the committee for the first time that the chopper was so old that it had no black box. Okay? So we've gone from ordering Pathfinders in to find it, number one, send the U.S. Army Pathfinder 2 days looking for it, to wash away the flood, to 3 now that was never one to begin with. And there was not a single member of that congressional committee asked Mr. Reed. Nobody said, Mr. Reed, if there was no black box, then why did we send an Army Pathfinder team looking for one? Not a single question. I have spoken with experienced military pilots, and they think there was no black box, story is not credible. I really don't either. Now, here's the other thing. We also know that the official military report says the first units on the ground were Army Rangers at 4:12 a.m. Those are the same Rangers, by the way, that forces 16 and 17 had flown to another site earlier in the evening. They made their way by foot to the crash site, and then the Pathfinders were there almost immediately after the Rangers. But we have found in the official chronology, George, that there is an unidentified group on the ground at 3:04 a.m. Okay? We know there was another group, we don't know the identity of the group, unidentified, on the ground at 3:04 a.m. The crash site was secured by a Predator drone at 2:55 a.m. I don't know why the final report doesn't mention that unidentified group on the ground. I don't know what they were doing. There is language in this chronology that coalition elements were spotted going into the crash site, examining it, and leaving. And that's before the Rangers ever arrived.
That's true. What happened to the 100 Taliban members who were heading for that scene before the helicopter got shot down? After it was shot down, what happened? Did they head for the hills or what?
Well, we don't know. And remember that the 100 Taliban who were brought in, we discovered evidence of that in May. But the record is not clear. It simply isn't clear. The official military record said the landing zone was ice. In other words, that means nobody was there. But obviously, you got an RPG fire department, so how is it ice? And going back to Ian's question, there have been unofficial speculation on why the SEALs were put on one chopper. We have heard some off-the-record explanations from folks in the area that the SEALs were told that the landing zone was so hot, in other words, it was so full of Taliban that 2 choppers would have never made it. The second chopper would have gotten shot down. So we don't really know answers to any of those questions. Again, underscoring the need for a meaningful investigation.
And in every launch of some kind of military mission, they always have more than one. I've never heard of putting all your troops on one chopper.
Well, again, it is inexplicable. It is, and it's crazy. And obviously, the very worst thing that could happen did happen. I don't know whether something happened on board that chopper or not. Those Afghans don't know. But without a black box, we'll never know. We had a black box with a voice data recorder. We would have a clue as to what happened.
We
know that this chopper was delayed in the air and we lost communication with it at one point. It was supposed to call in. When the chopper took off, there was a pre-arranged protocol for call-in. It was supposed to call in at the 6-minute mark before landing, the 3-minute mark before landing, the 1-minute mark. It made its call at the 6-minute mark, but then when it turned in over to the valley, did not make the 3-minute call, did not make the 1-minute call. There were sporadic communications. They were very odd from the chopper. It requested what's known as a sparkle. All that time to go to that sparkle was like a flash bulb. This AC-130 basically was firing. When we land these missions at night, George, we use ultraviolet light or we use infrared light, which is flashed down by this AC-130. It's called a burn, like a flashlight. And the only way you can see it is with night vision goggles. And the game plan called for a burn 1 minute before landing. Well, Extortion 17, out in the middle of nowhere, when it's not even a minute out, requests a sparkle. And when it requests that, we hear the Apache pilot saying, "Why are you requesting a sparkle? You're not even a minute out." And it's just an odd request from the pilot.
Stay with us, Don. Hold on. We're going to come back and wrap things up and take final phone calls with you. Don Brown's book available at all the big places, Amazon, and his website's linked up at coasttocoastam.com. And welcome back to Coast to Coast. Don Brown with us, Don. And I made the assumption every bookstore has your book. Is that pretty accurate?
The books are in all Barnes & Noble around the country. You can go to my website at donbrownbooks.com. If anyone would like an autographed copy, we can arrange for that. But yes, Barnes & Noble, go to my website. Of course, go online as well. And we're hoping to get this book as a copy in the hands of every American. And it's a story that needs to be told, needs to be repeated.
Sure does. Let's go to Joe in California. Joe, welcome to the program, and thanks for holding. Go ahead, Joseph.
Thank you for taking my call, sir.
Sure thing.
First of all, I'd like to give my condolences to the SEAL community and their families.
Thank you.
I'm an ex-Ranger, and I do not understand where the disconnect is here with those SEAL bodies. Because I can tell you from experience, there is a tradition, a long-standing tradition in the Army Rangers. We do not leave dead Americans behind. Whether they were burned or whatever, those bodies have to be identified, and I don't understand what's going on here.
Shed some light for us, Don.
Joe, thank you for your service. The Rangers are a great, tremendous fighting force, and are still involved in Afghanistan. Matter of fact, U.S. Navy SEALs and Army Rangers are carrying the brunt of special operations forces now. Joe, the bodies, remember, were brought back to Dover Air Base on August the 9th, 2011. However, the Pentagon made the claim that there were no identifiable remains due to the nature of the shoot down.
Yeah, they were tragically obliterated, weren't they?
Well, the fact is that the Pathfinders found at least eight bodies outside the chopper that were clearly identifiable and barely even burned. This chopper was broken into 3 sections when it went down.
Did some of them have bullet wounds, Don? I got to ask you that.
Yeah.
Did any of the victims have bullet wounds?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I was given access to 3 autopsies. Remember, we lost 30 Americans, so I only had a very small sampling of autopsies. But in 2 of the 3, there's a notation made by the military pathologist which states, quote, "Cook-off rounds found at autopsy, but discarded as of having no evidentiary value." Cook-off rounds found at autopsy. Found at autopsy is a phrase that pathologists use, sort of a term of art, means found in the body. A cook-off round is a bullet. It's a bullet that goes off because of heat. But, the interesting thing about it is, George, if you were to take a box of 22 ammunition or 30 optics, whatever, and put it in a fire, most people think it's going to explode. But the fact of the matter is that if the gunpowder goes off at all, really nothing happens. It's like the old commercial, snap, crackle, pop. As a matter of fact, if the bullet cooks off, the casing of the bullet will travel farther than the bullet itself. The bullet must be inside of the barrel of a rifle or a gun, or primarily a rifle, for it to cook off and even penetrate the body. In this case, the Pathfinders found the weapon scattered out on the ground. So it's curious as to how cook-off rounds are found in the body. Cook-off rounds don't penetrate the body unless they're in a gun and the gun is pointed at the body and it's heated long enough to go off. This chopper fell just a couple seconds in the bullet, and again, the weapons were out on the ground. So that's an oddity. The second oddity about that, George, is why are you throwing away bullets? Why are the pathologists making an immediate determination there are no evidentiary values and throwing them away? You don't throw away.
Sounds like the Kennedy assassination, doesn't it? Something's not right here.
Yeah, you don't throw away bullets. You keep them. You know, I mean, I was speaking to one of the U.S. attorneys a few years ago when I was in San Diego. As a matter of fact, I was visited by a friend of mine who at that time was a U.S. attorney, and they were having to deal with the Jeffrey McDonald case. You may remember that case from 1970, Green Beret. The book, The Fatal Vision, was written by Joe McGinnis, and Jeffrey McDonald maintained his innocence. He was an Army doctor and kept appealing. Well, they kept the evidence in the courthouse there in Raleigh, North Carolina, for years and years and never let the evidence go. But why are you throwing away bullets? Why are you making a determination there? Why are you doing that? That makes no sense. And that's another question that needs to be asked. It raises, when you look into this report, into the 1,200 pages that have been classified and then are declassified, it raises question after question after question after question, which makes you raise an eyebrow about what happened on this mission.
Just great research on your part. And Joe, thanks for your call. Let's go next to Charles in Los Angeles. Welcome to the program, Charles. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'll try to be quick here. Some of it's been covered, but if he knows how many SEALs, Navy SEALs that were involved in the Osama Bin Laden fiasco are still living today. And also on December, after the 9/11 fiasco, I personally heard Madeleine Albright, the Secretary of State at that time, state that Osama bin Laden had died of kidney failure. There were no pictures. Body was thrown in the ocean. I don't think that was Osama bin Laden in Pakistan.
And we don't know how many SEALs, and we don't know all their identities, from the Osama bin Laden case. Do we not, Don?
No, we don't. We've had a couple, of course, Rob O'Neill and a couple other ones who have come out, but we don't know. I do not have any evidence to suggest, and I would have had it, I just don't have any evidence to suggest that any of the SEALs on the Bin Laden raid were the same SEAls that were on Source of 17.
We don't know that, but they could have been.
Well, I mean, there could have been an overlap. We don't know. What I've been told is that the Red Squadron, there are several squadrons in SEAL Team 6 was primarily involved in the Bin Laden raid, and these were members of Gold Squadron primarily on Force of 17. But the point is that the Taliban had no way of knowing who was who, except knowing that if it's an American chopper in that valley, it's probably going to be either Rangers or SEALs, because that's all we were flying. But we don't really know. You're correct. How many U.S. Navy SEALs were involved in the Bin Laden raid and on Neptune Spear? It remains classified. We may never know.
What was it about this case, Don, that riled you up, that got you into writing the book Call Sign?
Well, there had been and remember that some of the family members were given this little flash drive, which has the investigation on it a month or so afterwards, and some began to read it. And I watched the press conference that was held in Washington, D.C. at the National Press Club involving three of the family members and some significant and distinguished military members, such as Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, former Admiral H. Lyons, who was CPAC, four-star admiral in the Reagan administration, and General Paul Valley and several others from Washington, D.C., and to hear the stories and the heart-wrenching confusion and pain from some of the family members, it was just very, very moving. And I sent an email to one of the mothers just saying, look, if you need help, let me know. I'll be happy to chat with you. And to my surprise, frankly, I was surprised, she contacted me back immediately and said, this is a godsend. We would like to talk to you. And so her name was Karen Vaughn. She's now a national spokesperson for Concerned Veterans of America. And to make a long story short, 3 or 4 weeks after we began communicating, I drove down to Atlanta and met with Karen and Billy. They were on their way from Tennessee, where they're from initially, back down to Florida, and met and spoke for about 3 hours or so. And they gave me a copy of the disc, and I began to review it and discover numerous inconsistencies. So that's sort of the way I sort of got involved with it.
Okay, let's go to Keith in Stamford, Connecticut now. Keith, go ahead.
Hey, first I would like to thank you both for your service.
Thank you.
To the country at this time of year, the 4th of July coming up. It's just a great time to thank our veterans. I remember the first time I heard this story, I was sick to my stomach because the first, as details slowly started coming in, it seemed painfully obvious to me that these poor guys were set up. And I think that, I don't know who or what, but I do know the Pakistanis were extremely embarrassed over the fact that we came in and we took Bin Laden right out from under their nose, right next to their largest military school, training school. Everybody knew he was there in Pakistan, but they didn't come across. We came in and took him, and I think that caused them great embarrassment. And I think some sort of political move was made to save for Pakistan to save face, and I think these guys were sacrificed. And I just want to ask your guest, you mentioned that there were congressional hearings about this. Were there any Senate hearings?
No. The only hearing that has taken place was a hearing that lasted a little bit more than an hour and a half, involving a subcommittee of the House Oversight Committee, the National Affairs Subcommittee, chaired by Utah Republican Jason Chaffetz. It's 2 in the morning here, 3 in the morning here in the East Coast. Congressman Jason Chaffetz of Utah chaired that committee, and it was pretty much I've described as a dog and pony show. No hard questions were asked. The Senate Armed Services Committee, chaired by Senator John McCain, has not looked at it. The House Armed Services Committee has not looked at it. And these Armed Services Committees need to look at it. Because what's going to happen, we're going to have another set of Americans get killed based upon the same foolish set of decisions that have been made here. You say you think they're sacrificed. Yeah, I don't know what happened. I do know that it almost looks like somebody pulled their hands back and said, "Have at it." When you look at the case, at the whole record, it looks like somebody pulled their hands back and said, "Have at it." And by the way, you mentioned Pakistan, and the Bin Laden situation is crucial. The 90 days up to this shoot down is crucial because when President Obama comes out late at night, May 1st, approximately 11:30 Eastern, announces that Osama Bin Laden has been killed. Now, there had been an agreement brokered by then Secretary of Defense Robert Gates, we're not going to give the name of the group that does this. So President Obama, to his credit, when he comes out, says that the operation is carried out by a small group of Americans. I say to his credit because he doesn't spill the beans on the identity. That was May 1st. It's already May 2nd in Afghanistan. And on May 2nd, the Taliban immediately vows revenge. But on May 3rd, the vice president is at a function in Washington, D.C. at a hotel, celebrating the 50th anniversary of the North Atlantic Alliance. And as he is speaking, he recognizes a U.S. Navy Admiral, James Stavridis, in the audience. The vice president gets excited and exuberant, and he says, "There's Admiral Stavridis. It's amazing what his Navy SEALs did just 2 days ago." And so the SEAL unit today, the SEALs are now identified as the unit that's taking out Bin Laden. Now, SEAL Team 6 is not yet identified, but the SEALs are. And we know that when that happens, that members of the Navy SEALs are calling their family members back home saying, "Get off social media, you now have a target on your back," and it was very disconcerting. Secretary Gates was extremely upset about it. And again, I don't have any reason, I don't know why the vice president did that, but it slipped. And then not only that, but then on June the 24th, get this, former CIA director Leon Panetta slips again in Washington at a meeting, and I cover this in the book, this is uncontroverted, and actually reveals that SEAL Team 6 is the unit that is specifically involved. And when he does that, there are at least two producers from the movie Zero Dark 30 in the audience. And the Pentagon Inspector General did find that there had been a major breach of security. So you have, unfortunately, a couple of, slip-ups by, in the best case scenario, slip-ups by high administration officials, in which the SEAL team is touted. Now, here's the thing. With those security breaches, whether they're intentional or non-intentional, I'm not saying one way or the other, with those security breaches, plus the Taliban's vow of revenge going back to the Bin Laden raid, plus the fact that we have, intelligence intercepting messages, they're bringing in 100 Taliban fighters to shoot down an American chopper, plus 3 attacks against choppers in this valley in a 90-day period, and we still don't give this SEAL team on this Army National Guard chopper pre-suppression fire into that landing zone. It just makes your blood boil.
It does indeed. Now, what about the family members of these victims? They've stayed pretty quiet, haven't they?
Many have. Many have. It's interesting. There are a handful who want this thing investigated again. There are some who don't want to deal with it. I understand that. It's a tremendous painful thing to have to go through with. I don't think from what I've seen, there's any consensus amongst the family members. Some don't want to deal with it, and that's understandable. Some believe what the military said. Others are demanding another investigation.
It's 3 o'clock.
It's interesting because I spoke to a gentleman the other day who had been involved basically in the negotiations for, Terry Anderson, the hostage from Lebanon, and he was talking about how the effect it could have on family members. But the family members that I saw that day at that National Press Club meeting in Washington, D.C. were clearly torn apart by this and are demanding that some answers be given.
Let's go to Michael in Buffalo, New York, first-time caller. Michael, let's get you in. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think a bigger problem has been like the rules of engagement. We've had problems with that at least until the Vietnam War, where these rules of engagement change every time the wind blows.
You're right.
In Vietnam, B-52s were ordered when they were bombing North Vietnam, Hanoi or whatever, to fly single file in the same altitude instead of staggering the pads and altitudes and things, which made them sitting ducks for the SAM missiles. In Somalia, I believe in that episode that had the movie Black Hawk Down, that an AC-130 was requested unless Aspen personally denied the fire support and stuff like that that led to that. I don't know. This is
well, no, you're right.
Just a continuing problem. And as far as no identifiable remains, I think that's a bunch of hogwash. Look at what they were able to do after the World Trade Center.
Don, there's outrage here. I can feel it.
Well, there needs to be, and there needs to be discussion on rules of engagement. Unfortunately, the national consciousness is, in many instances, distracted by foolish things that are happening in the pop culture. But we're having our very finest getting killed because of politically correct rules of engagement. And it's not just this administration, as the caller pointed out. It's been a problem going back to the Vietnam War. But you cannot put Americans, and as you said, George, the issue isn't, this isn't a debate, it's whether we do or don't need to be there. We are there. And if you're going to put Americans there, you can't get political with the rules of engagement. Rules of engagement that get Americans killed are politically driven from the top down to accommodate typically, someone else in another country. But if you're going to put Americans in, you have to protect American life first and foremost. And that's not happening.
We just never seem to go in with the thought of winning.
Well, no, you can't. When you're saying that we're going to let you shoot our troops and you can't even clear the area first, of course. I mean, that's it does look like the SEAL team was sacrificed. I'm not saying that happened. It looks like it. I mean, it's absolutely crazy.
It does. Don, thanks for being on the program. Good luck with call sign extortion 17.
Thank you, George. God bless. And again, happy Independence Day weekend, and thanks for the work that you're doing.
You got it. Don Brown, of course, and his website linked up at coasttocoastam.com, donbrownbooks.com.
And I